Bitcoin is, I think, literally as important or more important than fire. Think of any other seminal technology that you can think of. It's how we communicate value. It's going to transform the human race as it's increasingly adopted.
What a lot of Bitcoiners intuitively feel is that we're holding something that is infinite. Satoshi was able to turn something infinite into something finite that you can actually own. It's changing what we view as ownership and what we value.
The beauty of accumulating Bitcoin is that you're putting your money into a bucket that doesn't have holes in the bottom. With Bitcoin, you have 8 billion people in the service of 8 billion people. Whereas with fiat, basically, you have the state robbing you while you sleep and using what you've done, turning it to war and to other evil purposes. Bitcoin is a lifeboat. It's a life preserver for us.
When you align with Bitcoin, when you move your energy out of fiat into the Bitcoin system, it has profound effects on your soul and how you view the world.
It's not enough just to know about it. You have to actually get involved.
Our body is designed to heal itself. Belief is just as powerful, if not more powerful, than the pill itself. Welcome to the Signal podcast. Today's guest is someone that I've been really looking forward to speaking with because I believe that Bitcoiners who truly grasp its significance are going to become the modern day philosophers of our time. And these are people who don't just understand the technology, but who grasp the deeper meaning behind it, the ethical, spiritual, and societal implications. Duncan Cary Palmer is one of those people. Through his writing on honest money, faith, health, and personal sovereignty, he truly embodies the deeper Bitcoin ethos. People like Duncan are so important because they not only see through the illusions of the current system, but they're also helping to architect the new world that comes after. So, Duncan, I know that we could spend a lot of time unpacking your full story, but I'd actually love to focus today on the ideas that have come from your journey. So just briefly, can you share a snapshot of what led you to care so deeply about truth, freedom, and the topics that you write about?
First of all, thanks for the kind words. Yeah, so what can I share with you in that regard? One of the things that hit me early on was being part of the first draft lottery. I don't know how many of your listeners remember that there used to be a draft in the United States, and that was compulsory military service. But then at one point, it became a total dice roll. And I happened to be in college at the time, and I remember sitting around listening to the radio. This was back in the late 1960s. Listening to the radio as they drew birth dates out of a hat to determine who would be called up for military service and who would not be. And we're all sitting there, and I about fell out of my chair when my birthday came up as the fifth one drawn out of the hat. I became a conscientious objector. I was not before that time. It's really not until you're faced with a moral decision that you actually dive deeply into thinking about the implications and so on. And when I was faced with that decision, do I go into the Army or Navy or Air Force or Marines, and do I go out there and start killing people and supporting war efforts and so on? And I just couldn't do that morally. So that got me really clearly aware of the coercive nature of the state, of the government. So that's one key point. Another one is later on, I was the sole supporter of my family. When I married my wife, she worked But then I said to her, honey, I don't want the lady down the street raising my kids. I'd rather have you raising my children. And so I don't want you to work. And I was able, very thankful to God that for most of my life, I was able to both make a living sufficient to support the family, although it was sometimes hard to make ends meet, but also doing work that I generally enjoyed, which is technical work. So it wasn't all roses, but for the most part, I was able to enjoy my work and do well at it. Then it was later that time I started feeling the pain of the coercive nature of the income tax and other government programs that essentially give you no choice, or appear at least to give you no choice. And so, as a result of all of that, I have had a chance to think about money. And of course, in school, they don't teach you what money is. I was reluctant to give it away to a government that was obviously doing all kinds of evil things with it.
The concept of the draft and having no control over that and just having your life put up at stake for through no fault of your own and you have no say in the matter is a wild concept for people living today to even imagine that you had to experience that. And if we had to experience something like that, I think a lot of people's mindset would change. And that's what they say about Bitcoin is that you don't often understand it until you're forced to. A lot of people in our generation today, we haven't been forced to see the real world consequences. Like people in other countries who have actually experienced hyperinflation or who know what it's like to not be able to be banked, they understand the significance of Bitcoin. But a lot of people in our country today don't understand the consequences of the current system we're living in. You having that background of actually experiencing the consequences of the system gives you a fuller understanding of Bitcoin and its significance. And that's a big reason why I wanted to have you on the show, is offering that perspective from a different generation. And because you have that deeper understanding, you can feel it just from speaking with you. You embody the ethos and you fully understand its significance in our society. And I can only imagine, with everything that you went through, how incredible it must have been for you to discover Bitcoin and to
Well,
see how it could actually solve a lot of the problems that you've been battling your entire life. So
yes,
can you talk about what it was like to discover Bitcoin and
sure.
how that made
So,
you hopeful?
as you just pointed out, it's not until you actually face something in a lot of cases that
Mhm.
you work through the details of how to deal with it. And in manner, when we had the whole scam going on, that woke up a lot of people
Mhm.
because they felt the pain. So sometimes pain is a
Yeah.
good thing in that sense. While I was trying to make a living, trying to feed the family, I would find one after another of opportunities, the patriot community of people other than myself who had woken up and had realized that, hey, this is not the way the world ought to work. And they started creating various enterprises, and in some cases, they opened them up as investment opportunities
Mhm.
for other like-minded people to invest in. I think there were two or three of those at least that I invested in, including a bank that some patriots discovered had been chartered. There was a bank charter that still existed from before the modern days. It had certain properties that looked very promising, and they intended to open up a bank that realized how the state interfered with money and caused problems. I'm trying to remember the name. I think it was America's First Bank.
Mhm.
And they actually moved that or reopened it. They took the bank charter and opened this bank on an Indian reservation in an effort to be isolated from the grasp of the federal authorities. And I invested, this was probably somewhere in the early 90s. I invested $5,000 in that bank. Of course, the federal government disrespected the whole geographic jurisdiction thing, they swooped in and destroyed the bank offices and they arrested the bank principals. And then they had the audacity to send me some paperwork saying, oh, won't you fill this out and complain against the people that were running this bank? And that just raised my anger because there's a saying that government is that entity that breaks your legs and then gives you a cast and crutches and tells you how much they're helping you. And that's the nature of the state. So that was one example. There were other enterprises of various kinds that I attempted to deal with, and they were all essentially destroyed by the government. So I was watching the development of the cypherpunk movement. One other thing you need to know is that I see the world from 40,000 feet. Don't get down into the details, which is, it's a blessing and a curse. So I was watching the development of Bitcoin long before it began. I was watching David Chaum developing electronic cash, and Bernard von Nothaus, I think, developed a form of gold-backed money. And Nothaus was, I think, he was ultimately jailed. Chaum, I think, did fine. I don't think anything ever actually came out of that other than it was one of the threads of technology that led into the development of Bitcoin. When Bitcoin came along, I was excited and pleased at that. But even though I've been involved since before the beginning, I didn't understand the details. So I lost the bulk of what I bought in the early days at Mt. Gox, just to give you an idea of how disconnected I am. And it hasn't really been until the last 3 or 4 years that I've become a full-on maxi. But through listening to others and gradual filling in of the blank spaces between the ears here, I have ultimately realized that Bitcoin is the money. It's the best thing we've got going, and I can see the ultimate potential of it.
I know that you're a man of faith, and that's very important to you. So, do you believe that Bitcoin is divinely aligned, like spiritually or biblically? Because in your writings, you mentioned this idea in the Bible of honest weights and measures. So, can you describe what that means to you in the context of Bitcoin?
Yes, absolutely. Initially, it was the number go up as it is with so
Mhm.
many people. It was the idea that, oh, here's finally someplace I can put my money and have it mature and have it maintain its value, and the state can't reach out and get it. So at least it had that separation. As it has progressed and as my understanding of it has progressed, I realize very clearly that it is unique in that the idea of honest weights and measures, let me just address that for a moment. In the Old Testament, in the Bible, we read, you shall not have in your bag differing weights, a large and a small. You shall not have in your house differing measures, a large and a small. You shall have a full and just weight. You shall have a full and just measure, that your days may be prolonged in the land which Jehovah your God gives you. Now, some people think of or picture God as the legislature, where God is up there making rules, and if we don't follow them, we get whacked, okay? And that's pretty much the way the US government and most other governments of the world work. The reality is that God actually cares about us and is giving us guidelines, principles to live by. And if we live by those principles, if we deal with each other using honest weights and measures and don't cheat each other by shaving the corners off our coins or whatever means may come to mind, the basic concept of thou shalt not steal is really for our benefit, for everybody's benefit. And so if you have a money that is inflexible, that doesn't change, that's a fixed quantity. In fact, most people don't know this, but virtually everywhere in the Bible that you read the word money, that's a bad English translation. It typically is either silver or gold or something that is relatively scarce. So that's why silver and gold really became money. They were hard to acquire and they were actually somewhat hard to move around. They were heavy. In fact, in the Old Testament, rich people like Abraham, when you wanted to say, oh, this guy is a rich man, you said he was a heavy man because he's carrying this weight around. You look at somebody and say, that guy is a real heavy. But in the area of wealth, it was because the most scarce, the most difficult to acquire valuable things were weighty, were heavy. Bitcoin transcends them all. It is superior to gold. For example, next week we might open the paper and read that somebody's developed a microbe that can scavenge gold out of the oceans, and all of a sudden we'll have tons and tons of gold just washing up on the shore. Or Elon will send a starship out there and grab a gold asteroid and drop it into orbit here and start bombing the earth with melted gold. But that can't happen with Bitcoin. It's the first artificial scarcity. It's absolutely limited in its quantity. And for that reason, it, in my mind, qualifies as the most honest weight and measure available. It's the yardstick that by which we can measure everything else.
Yeah, very well said. In your writings, you have this quote: Bitcoin is the finest money technology thus far devised by man, matching biblical ideals better than any other. And I love that quote. So, how significant is Bitcoin in the trajectory of humanity? Do you think it's going to move us onto a better path, spiritually and materially?
Bitcoin is, I think, literally as important or more important than fire. Think of any other seminal technology that you can think of, the internal combustion engine, the rocket, the railroad, those all kind of fade because money is the yardstick by which we measure everything else. It's how we communicate value. So it's incredibly important, just practically speaking, and of course, spiritually, again, because it aligns with the biblical ideals. And it's going to transform the human race as it's increasingly adopted.
Yeah, very well said. And I'm sure that it probably frustrates you a little bit seeing how misunderstood Bitcoin is. So, what are some of the reasons why you think Bitcoin is so misunderstood by the general population? And what would you say to someone who is a skeptic and may view Bitcoin as just a worldly distraction?
So I have these conversations with friends fairly often. Just the other day, I was taking a walk with a friend, and I asked him, David, why is it we've talked about Bitcoin before? Can you tell me what's held you back from Bitcoin? Because I want to be able to express this more clearly. I want to be
Mhm.
persuasive, especially with the people that I care the most about, my family, my friends, my local community. One of the things he brought up the fact that it's not tangible, that it's not something you can hold in your hands, that you can look at, and so on. And I explained to him that was a benefit. Unlike gold, Bitcoin, because it's intangible, can be moved in any quantity anywhere in the world in a matter of the move can be initiated instantly or within seconds, and then the actual move on the blockchain occurs on average every 10 minutes. For that reason, you don't have to hire guards to protect it as long as you can maintain your private key securely, your Bitcoin is secure, and not even a nation state can extract it from you.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this concept a lot lately about that idea of something needing to be physical in order for it to have value. And that's basically how our society has been structured, is that we only value things that are physical, and we place so much emphasis on the physical realm and the material realm. And that's one of the things that fascinates me the most about Bitcoin is that it bridges other realms with the physical realm. We place so much emphasis on the physical realm, but quantum mechanics and quantum physics essentially shows that our physical reality is only 0.001% of everything that exists. The rest is in this informational realm, and everything that's significant starts in that informational realm. And Bitcoin essentially exists in the informational realm, which is where everything starts. So the physical realm is basically just a projection of that informational realm. And it's a really deep concept that's hard to wrap your head around, but it's really nice to see that this is what mystics have been saying for all of humanity. And now science is starting to prove it with quantum physics. And Bitcoin kind of bridges that informational realm with the physical realm. And I think even us Bitcoiners who truly grasp its significance don't truly grasp the significance of that reaching into that informational realm and bringing it out into the physical realm. And I think that's what makes Bitcoiners less focused on material possessions. Because before I discovered Bitcoin and before other people discovered Bitcoin, you are more consumed with the material world, with cars, houses, and watches. But I found that since I discovered Bitcoin, none of that stuff matters, or they matter much less, because when you hold Bitcoin and when you own Bitcoin, you're essentially owning a piece of this informational realm, which is priceless. So you're basically owning something that is priceless. And my brain is still struggling to comprehend that. But I think that's what a lot of Bitcoiners intuitively feel, is that we're holding something that is infinite, but yet what Satoshi developed with the mining process, he was able to turn something infinite into something finite that you can actually own. And it's changing what we view as ownership and what we value. So before Bitcoin, we were taught to value physical things, but I think this represents a shift in humanity. We're not just valuing physical things, we're valuing things that go beyond the physical realm. And Bitcoin is the first thing that woke me up to it, and I think is waking a lot of people up to valuing things in that informational realm.
Yeah, those are some great observations, Devin. I'm reminded of what one of Jesus' principal followers, Paul, he was one of Jesus' delegates that got sent around the world, literally, the world of his day, bringing out the good news of the kingdom of God. And like any material good, Bitcoin can be abused if you see it as a be all and end all of things. Paul wrote that the love of money is the root of all evil. So if you're loving the money, loving the Bitcoin just for its own sake, if your entire goal in life is just stacking, having that, I think some people see it as power, and they can just, you can use, like fire, you can use fire for good or you can use it for great evil. The same thing with Bitcoin. However, the beauty of accumulating Bitcoin is that you're putting your money into a bucket that doesn't have holes in the bottom. The longer time goes by, the less of what you put in that bucket is still there. With Bitcoin, it stays there. It's not going anywhere. The beauty of that is what the scriptures call good stewardship. You can save your money and you can have that available then to do good in the world, to help other people. It gives you the power and the control to be generous. You don't have to worry about just making ends meet or just feeding your family. As your stack increases, you now have the resources available to do things. For example, the way God wired my brain, I'm an inventor and I love just creating things out of nothing. I pull together ideas, I read a lot, talk to a lot of people, and pretty regularly get interesting new ideas of how things could be done differently or better or whatever. For me personally, the sad thing was that I never, as an inventor, I was never quite able to make a living off of my inventions. So as a consequence, I became a shirt sleeve engineer, learned how to program computers, learned how to design electronics, and worked for a lot of different people. And in the course of that, I was able to create things of value in the world that are now in equipment that's, for example, I don't know if you've heard of the 840 ventilator. It's a machine that was developed at Puritan Bennett, and some of my inventions are in that machine, and they're out there in the world helping people. But with Bitcoin, instead of as you accumulate Bitcoin and as its value increases, at least as it's maintained, this frees you up to do the things that God designed you to do. If you're an artist or an inventor or a writer or whatever, you're free to create new things that will be of value to other people in the world. And then that value just gets multiplied as it's spread to everyone else who can use it or value it or appreciate it. With Bitcoin, you have 8 billion people in the service of 8 billion people. Whereas with fiat, basically, you have the state robbing you while you sleep and using what you've done, turning it to war and to other evil purposes.
Yeah, I love how you break that down because, yeah, with our current systems with the centralized control, we really have the people at the top, the 1%, they've developed systems where the 99% are fighting amongst each other. And that's what Bitcoin does, is it flips that script. So instead of the 99% fighting against each other with the decentralized nature, it brings everyone together. So now you have the 99% working together. And imagine just how much society can achieve if you've got these 8 billion people working together as opposed to fighting each other. So not
Yep.
only will that just solve a lot of problems we have, but I think it propels society to levels that we can't even imagine.
Yes, and it cures inflation. Inflation really is the principal source of inflation is the state. It's called monetary inflation. And as they print money, it devalues everything that you or I have done and everything we've tried to save. But they can't print Bitcoin. The beauty of Bitcoin is that you don't have to wait for the whole world to adopt Bitcoin. Individuals can step into the Bitcoin world today. Just start putting your savings in Bitcoin and learn, for sure, learn how to use it carefully, hold it in self-custody. That was how I lost my shirt at Mount Gox because I did not understand that extremely important detail. Now it's a mantra throughout the Bitcoin world, not your keys, not your coins. But back when I first acquired Bitcoin from Mt. Gox, I thought I was fat, dumb, and happy. I was pretty dumb
Yeah.
and lost it all because I did not understand that I had to have it in my own custody. So there's concerns in the present day with ETFs and other things. These are third parties. These are introducing counterparty risk. I'd say it's not at all a bad thing, but if you're going to be serious about Bitcoin, start right from the beginning. Learn how to self-custody your Bitcoin.
That's one of the things that I value about Bitcoin the most is how it changed my mindset to value sovereignty so much more. Whereas before Bitcoin, I was just outsourcing pretty much my entire life to outside sources. And with Bitcoin, it taught me that I actually have way more power than I realized before. And it just empowers your soul when you take back that power and realize that you can actually create your own life path and you don't have to just follow this path that has been laid out to you by society. You can live a life on your own terms, and it's so empowering to have that feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole counterparty risk thing, I probably was a great candidate for Bitcoin because I experienced that very early on when I started disagreeing with the government's assessment of what I supposedly owed them. I discovered really quickly at that time what counterparty risk was, although sadly I didn't apply that to my Bitcoin path until much later on. The IRS sent a fax to my bank and said, give us all his money. And the bank said, here you go. Absolutely no due process of law as we're taught in civics that, oh, we have the courts and there's due process of law where you're innocent until you're proven guilty. That's not the way the system actually works. The way it works is whoever's in power calls the shots and they can rob you because you're not holding your money. It's in a bank or it's in some other institution.
Yeah. Um,
Bitcoin, if you're holding Bitcoin in your own cold storage wallet, it's totally out of the reach of those bozos.
yeah, I had to learn a similar lesson as you with an exchange called Voyager. Lost a painful amount of Bitcoin, and it's a lesson that I'll never forget.
Yep.
And most people haven't learned that lesson yet, and they still believe that their money in the bank is safe. And that's a very valuable lesson that I learned, is that the money is not even in the bank. So it's just, we're all just relying on trusting the bank, but a bank run can happen so quickly. If people realized how the financial system works, there would be a bank run tomorrow and everything would fall apart. So they basically are dependent on people just not understanding how things work.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just bank runs. Trying to remember one of the African countries recently devalued their currency. So overnight, the money, quote unquote, money that everybody thought they had was now worth like 50% of what it was the day before. You
Mm.
wake up in the morning and all of a sudden half your wealth is gone. That's got to be pretty harsh. And we're still at the point where most Americans are clueless that can happen.
In one of your articles, you state, understand the times, be wise as serpents, harmless as doves. So, what does it mean to understand the times right now, economically, spiritually, and globally?
Yeah, that's a tough question. Of course, that wise as serpents and harmless as doves, that's a quote from Jesus. And I guess for me, what that means is some of the things we've already been discussing. Realizing that governments and the world around us in general are not our friends. Okay, understanding the times, I guess the major component of that we've already briefly discussed, but people need to be aware that they're surrounded with things that are not their friends, that they're not there to help you. We grow up thinking that everything's okay. And I grew up being told in school and by everyone around me, America's the greatest country in the world, and you live in a free country. And I remember conversations with other kids. Your freedom ends where my nose begins, and things like that. The reality, the sad reality that people need to come to the realization of is that nation states are evil, coercive, thieving institutions, and corporations are their creatures. Corporations are literally created by the state. And a lot of society is very self-serving. I guess part of it starts with just coming to an awareness that we're walking through a minefield and we need to find the right path. And it's not all roses. I call governments around the world the fiefdoms of Satan. I would encourage any readers who might find that of interest to look up Michael Heiser and his book, The Unseen Realm. The good news, you'll hear Christians and churches talk about the gospel. Gospel is an archaic English word that just means good news. For me, the good news is that there is a better way. There is a path through this minefield. There is a way that we can go. One of the proverbs says, there's a way that seems right to a man, but the ends thereof are the ways of death. Unfortunately, another metaphor that the Bible uses is that people are sheep. So we have a tendency to just be followers, and we follow whatever seems convenient at the time, and we don't think a lot about it. I think that the core libertarian philosophy is absolutely true. That philosophy is do not initiate force against another person. It's basically okay to respond with force. If you're being attacked, you can mount a defense, and that's perfectly morally legitimate. But for you to go out and start pushing people around or telling them what to do, that is illegitimate. Why is that? We have to go back to the very first chapter of the Bible, Genesis 1. God created man in his image and said to man, take dominion over the birds of the air, the fish of the sea, and the things that creep on the land. But God nowhere gives man dominion over his fellow man. And that's the core problem of all governments and all states, all of the things they influence, is they insist that they have the right to tell you or me what to do, to absolutely govern our lives, and to force us to use a certain kind of money to just basically control us. The really good part of the good news is that unlike every other tyrant that we've experienced in our lives and every other government that has ruled us in the world, Jesus is truly a benevolent governor, and he actually literally has our absolute best interests in mind. And that's why, going back to the discussion about honest weights and measures, that's why when we follow that guideline, that bit of news that God conveys to us, he says, use honest weights, don't cheat your neighbor, then the world works better. Everything works better. We have a better outlook. The whole spiritual side of things stacks up and lines up with the physical side of things, and everything begins to work. Back to the original question. All right, people need to realize that surrounding them is not their friend. We, as sheep, need to find the right way to follow. And that right way, I believe, is what Jesus teaches and says. And of course, Bitcoin is a huge part of that because it falls right into it's one of the principal guidelines that God gives us for how to live.
In your writing, you often write with a prophetic tone. So, what do you think is coming up for us in the coming years? I don't know if you're familiar with this concept of the fourth turning, but it's the idea that societies go in cycles, and every 4 generations or about every 80 years, we see these predictable cycles. It seems like now we're at the end of fourth turning, and that's marked by people start to have less trust in institutions. We see an increase in corruption that becomes more overt than it was previously. And the hallmark of the fourth turning is the money breaking. So it seems like we're seeing all the signs of being in the fourth turning. And typically at the end of the fourth turning, it leads to a lot of unrest and often a lot of violence as a new world order emerges. And that's cause for some pessimism. But I feel like with Bitcoin especially, there's hope that we can gradually shift onto this better path, and we don't necessarily have to experience violence during this cycle because we can just shift onto this other more peaceful path that Bitcoin allows for. So do you agree with that idea that Bitcoin can save us from a lot of violence and a collapse that we might see if Bitcoin weren't there to help guide us?
So, Devin, I think you're spot on there. As far as the fourth turning goes, again, seeing the world from 40,000 feet, I have heard of it and I do agree, and I do see the world going in cycles. And I do see that we are, especially with fiat stretched to where it is right now, I think we're on the cusp of some troubled times and struggles. But absolutely, yes, Bitcoin is a lifeboat. It's a life preserver for us. And one of the beauties of it is, as I mentioned before, that any individual listening to the sound of our voices right now, if they just step into the Bitcoin world, if they just hear what's being said and adopt Bitcoin, you don't have to wait for the government to do it. You as an individual can adopt Bitcoin and start using it for the benefit of yourself and your family. This is why my buddy Kurt and I started up a Bitcoin meetup here in Escondido a little over a year ago. And it's just great getting together with other like-minded people on a regular basis. The older I get, the more I realize how much I still have to learn. As long as somebody's not intentionally out to get me, especially when I can sit down with them face to face, like you and I are face to face right now, and have a conversation, there's something I can learn from them. And hopefully, one of the things in my heart is to help them. And so, in the local community, I'm hoping that we can get a Bitcoin circular economy going and have more and more people onboarded into Bitcoin. One of the things we're trying to do is find merchants and individuals that have goods or services available that they would be willing to accept Bitcoin for. Because Bitcoin is not only a store of value, it is a currency, and it can be a currency, and it needs to be a currency. And that will come as more and more people adopt it. And so we already have some of that.
Yeah, I love that concept of creating parallel economies now. So you're right. You bring up this idea that we don't have to wait for the world to catch up. We can shift now into this parallel economy, this alternative system. And I've been thinking about this concept about how instead of being wrapped up in this battle against fiat, we can just move our energy out of fiat and into the Bitcoin world. And we can start developing parallel systems and parallel worlds right now. And instead of wasting our energy on fighting something, we can just create something. And when we create something, we can just make the current system obsolete. So we don't ever have to fight it. We can just create something beautiful on the side that just makes the current system obsolete. And I love that idea of starting locally. We don't have to wait for hyper Bitcoinization. We can start now. We can start with yourself. And that's what you've done. And although I've been a Bitcoiner for a number of years, it wasn't until recently that I started going to these meetups and meeting other Bitcoiners. And there's something intangible that happens when you meet other Bitcoiners and you feel their energy, because Bitcoiners really do exude a very unique energy. If you want to understand the secrets of the universe, learn to think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Bitcoin really, it resonates at a certain frequency. And that frequency represents truth, it represents sovereignty. And so when you align with Bitcoin, when you move your energy out of fiat into the Bitcoin system, you start to resonate at that same frequency. And it has profound effects on your soul and how you view the world. And it's powerful when you resonate at the frequency of truth, because we're living in a world, in a fiat world, that it gaslights us and prevents us from living in truth and feeling the truth, because the whole fiat system is based on lies and fake money, fake health, fake media, but Bitcoin gets you back to truth. And that frequency, when you align with that frequency, it's so powerful. And when you're around other Bitcoiners who are resonating at that same frequency, it's just, it feels so good for your soul to feel that alignment. And yeah, that's why I'm so grateful to have met people like you, because in just being around your presence for just 30 seconds, you can immediately tell that you're resonating at a different frequency. And when individuals start resonating at that frequency, that's slowly going to expand into the world. And if the world can resonate at that frequency of truth, that's what makes me hopeful. And that's why I appreciate Bitcoin so much, because it was the spark that triggered that resonation at that different frequency.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's one of the ways I would describe it is when you discover something wonderful, if you're a person of goodwill, you're excited, you want to share it with the people you care about and the people around you because you want everybody to get a piece of the action. You want them to enjoy and appreciate what you've found. That's why I tend to be enthusiastic about Bitcoin. I love the way that you brought out, and this is absolutely true. We need to create parallel systems in the realm of government. To me, that is what I see happening. You've asked, what do I see prophetically? How can we prepare? Jesus talked about the kingdom of God spreading. You put some yeast in a loaf of bread, and there's this slow reaction. It takes time, but eventually the yeast grows and spreads throughout the bread. The same way I see the kingdom of God, which it absolutely includes Bitcoin, spreading by moving people into parallel local gatherings of people that are completely voluntary. And in contrast to the way governments work, governments are top-down hierarchies with things created and handed down rules and regulations and things. And then at the lowest level, you have this enforcement agency like the IRS and the police and the militaries, and the whole structure is built on force. But the gatherings, people that gather the way Jesus taught, they gather and have these face-to-face conversations and figure out how can we cooperatively help one another and build one another up. And what's the best money to use? Obviously, it's Bitcoin. And how can we foster the development of our community? What I see happening is a continuation of that, whereas people wake up to the truth and to seeing that Bitcoin is superior money and to seeing that voluntary local governance structures where everybody is just concerned about everybody else in the community, that will eventually become so attractive and appealing to the people that are stuck in the old coercive systems. They'll just step out of the old way and step into the new way.
Yeah, I really appreciate hearing all of your wisdom and insights. And I also really enjoyed seeing that you've got a lot of writing about health. That's one thing that my eyes have been opened to through Bitcoin. I've seen the flaws in the fiat money system, but I've also realized how those same flaws basically spill over into medicine and health. It's been very disillusioning for me because I've been trained in the Western medical system and been working as a doctor, and just realized that I've been indoctrinated, and realizing that a lot of things that I've learned and that I've been practicing aren't really in line with the reality of things, and they're not in line with that frequency of truth. And so I've spent years diagnosing and treating, but I've realized that I've been taught very little about what actually creates health. And I saw that you've written deeply about this. And I know that your family has experienced personal loss due to the failings of the medical system. You have this quote that I really like that kind of hammers it home very succinctly. The Western medical establishment has a long ways to go when it comes to diagnosing illnesses, much less treating them without killing you in the process. And I think that hammers it home very well because the third leading cause of death in the US is iatrogenic errors, which basically is medical mistakes. And so, can you share your philosophy of health and how it differs from the mainstream view?
Yes, happy to do that. Mainstream medicine sees human beings as an accident of nature. When you look at the details of the design of the human body and the design of all of life around us, the whole, just for one example, our bodies are filled with ATP and with these little, literally motors embedded in the walls of every one of our cells, and they transfer adenosine triphosphate, I think, is the chemical that is essentially the gasoline, if you will, that powers our bodies and our cells. There's a little, literally little motors that rotate. And this was not really known until recent decades as we've had better tools to examine life at the most detailed level. But I've been told, or I understand, that every day more than our entire body weight of this ATP is processed through these little motors to keep us alive and to keep us moving. And you look at the molecular structure of one of those motors. And I'm an engineer and an inventor. I've told you that already. There's absolutely no freaking way that anything like remotely like that could possibly fall together by accident. It's just ludicrous to me. You look at things like there's a great series of YouTube videos by a guy named Z Frank, and they're hysterically funny. They're a little bit raunchy at times, but he describes, yeah, your listeners should find his video on the hummingbird. And when you look at the design of the hummingbird's tongue and the way it works to extract nectar from a flower, again, no freaking way that something like that could have just happened by accident. I don't care how long you have, billions, trillions of years, how many accidental combinations of things. There's a thing called a rock shrimp that has a claw that has to be actually cocked and latched into place. You look at things like this in the design of living creatures, and there's no way those could happen. So now let me pop back to answer the question. I think medicine is, as we know it, is retarded because it does not hold God in recognition. It doesn't, there's a phrase, credit where credit is due. I believe in giving credit where credit is due. And I look at God, I look at Jesus and go, wow, there is a real inventor. There's someone who, with a combination of incredible imagination and design ability, that assembled all of these absolutely phenomenal creatures that we look at all around us. If we just open our eyes and look at the world around us, medicine has gone wrong because they've elevated man to godhood. They've said, okay, we're the smart ones and we're going to do this. We're going to create chemicals and we'll call them drugs. And oh, by the way, they may have side effects. Every time I watch a drug commercial on TV, I about freak out because they show all these beautiful people just smiling and happily living their lives. And in the background, you hear the narrator talking about this side effect and that side effect. And oh, and certain fatal events have occurred, things that if you stop and actually listen to what they're saying ought to horrify you. I guess I started down the path very seriously when we lost a grandson to cancer the day before his 6th birthday. And he was treated with these, what I consider horribly destructive modalities, the worst of which was a bone marrow transplant, where essentially the medical establishment destroyed his immune system. So what's the right way to look at that? Let's not go in and knock the props out of God's original design. Let's look at how can we actually build up and strengthen that immune system. I have a lot of friends that have had cancer, and since losing our grandson 20 to 30 years ago, while he was sick, I researched things pretty deeply and found alternative means that would support his immune system. But because of government laws, I didn't have the parental authority to apply those, and his mother chose to take him down the conventional, what I call the medical industrial complex route. Since then, I've met with many friends, person to person, friends that have contracted cancer, and I've pled with them to try other things. And there's one thing that all of those who have followed the standard medical practices have in common, and that is they're all dead. There are very few that I was able to actually communicate with and convey things to who are still alive or who lived considerably longer because they took or worked towards means of bolstering their God-given immune system. So how do we do that? There's a few very general principles. One is to try and eliminate toxins. Or we live in a world where we're immersed in all kinds of toxic sources, and those toxins basically it's throwing a rock into a clock movement that gets in there and jams things up and breaks things and causes them not to work. If you can eliminate toxins from your system, that's a massively positive step. Another major area is nutrition, and that's something that the medical establishment only, as I've seen it and experienced it, only very peripherally deals with. Going back to a personal example, after surviving the bone marrow transplant, our grandson was being fed through a tube with this evil formula known as Pediasure. Even in the open literature from the conventional perspective about cancer, you see that sugar feeds cancer. I looked at the ingredients to Pediasure, and the top five ingredients were sugars of one form or another. And so the corruption and the ignorance embedded in that system are just beyond words to me. How can they be claiming to be helping my grandson when they're feeding them known carcinogenic substances as his primary source of food? I created an alternative nutrients for him that could go through a feeding tube. I called it Papasure instead of Pediasure because he called me Papa. Unfortunately, because I didn't have the legal right to govern his treatment, it was only in his last days that I was able to actually give him some of that. And by then it was too late. Okay, so toxins, nutrition. On the toxin side, there are ways that you can cleanse and flush toxins out of your body. So if you want to be healthy, look for those. Here's another thread to look at. Faith is definitely important in health. And it's not I'm not talking about necessarily following Jesus or your religious perspective on things. If you hear about something and you read about it and you think about it and you go, that sounds like it could help me, that other people have been helped. You still need enough faith to actually take the next step. It's not enough to just know about it. Same thing with Bitcoin. It's not enough just to know about it. You have to actually get involved. You have to actually try something. You need the faith, enough faith to at least try that out. Give it a good shot. Right now, in my family, we're dealing with kidney disease, and I don't have a real good solution. So while I'm looking for solutions to that, and it's exhausting, I'll tell you, it is exhausting to do the research, and sometimes it's very difficult to find the information because even out there on the internet, the search engines are in the thrall of what I call the powers that shouldn't be. And so they hide alternative health information from you and they don't present it in a fair fashion at all. So we're looking for some help for kidney disease. And so I'll just throw it out there. If any of your listeners happen to know something that helps restore kidney function, I'd love to hear about it.
I love what you're talking about faith because that's been one of the things that gets me the most excited about medicine is this idea of the placebo effect, which we learn about, and there's a ton of literature that supports the effects of the placebo effect and how powerful it is. Yet it's often downplayed, but the placebo effect is so powerful, and it basically is evidence to exactly what you're saying. That when you give people sugar pills and tell them that it actually is a medication that will help them with their medical condition, it actually has a powerful effect on actually helping with that medical condition, even though it's just a sugar pill. And that right there is evidence that our body is designed to heal itself. That belief is just as powerful, if not more powerful, than the pill itself. Our bodies are designed so intricately and so perfectly that they're designed to heal themselves. If people realize how powerful our bodies are and how powerful our body's healing systems are, it takes power away from the pharmaceutical industry and makes us less dependent on pills and that entire industry. So it's always frustrated me about why the placebo effect is not talked about more and why people don't make that into a bigger deal and want to understand it more. Because I think that's where everything lies, is in that placebo effect. If we study that and understand it, it would completely transform the way we practice medicine, and we could get people off pills and get them more aligned with more natural solutions to the problems that they're facing.
You're absolutely right. A merry heart does good like a medicine. Attitude is everything. If you are happy, if you laugh, if you talked about moving, all of these things work together and keep our bodies tuned up and fighting whatever ails us. Fasting actually is, when done carefully and properly, helps flush a lot of the toxins out of our body and enables our bodies to heal themselves. So,
Yeah, fasting is incredibly powerful. I've been intermittent fasting for years, and the research that shows the evidence, the positive effects of fasting is just overwhelming. Not only is it good for flushing out toxins, but it increases your longevity. There's studies that show it increases your lifespan by 7 years. It
wow.
increases your mental clarity. It improves your metabolic health. It helps with weight loss. It helps preserve muscle mass. So the benefits of intermittent fasting are undeniable, and it's pretty easy to incorporate into your life, but it's not really encouraged by the powers that shouldn't be because they benefit from you thinking that you need to be putting sugary foods into your body every couple hours and you need to eat breakfast. It's the most important meal of the day. So
Yeah.
these things that we've been told are just not true and they're often very harmful.
Yep. Back to my observation that the world around us is not really our friend.
Mm.
So I have to say, I'm extremely thankful for the development of the internet. It's enabled people all around the world to have better access to truth, to information that is real and legitimate. And if you take the time to critically examine what you're hearing and think about it. And also this, what we're doing right now, a face-to-face conversation. I'm learning some things from you, and hopefully the listeners will learn from both of us. But and again, that's why we're having these Bitcoin meetups. It's phenomenal when we get together. There's always something new and exciting to learn. It improves everybody.
If you
Okay.
could deliver one message to the world, what would it be?
Yes, I saw that. I thought about that for a while. We don't need nation states to tell us what to do. We can live peacefully with one another in small communities where each of those small communities can just follow Jesus' lead. He knows the path. He tells us what the path is. The Sermon on the Mount is the best. It's just a few chapters in the book of Matthew. Go read that and learn how to live. Follow those simple guidelines, Jesus, because he's got your best interests in mind, whereas these politicians do not. And so creating parallel structures to replace all of that political garbage is the way to go.
A lot of people compare Bitcoin to a religion. And I think
Yes,
when they say that, they often mean it in a negative sense.
yes.
So, what are your thoughts on Bitcoin as a religion? And do you think of that in a negative way?
Yes and no. I'm sure you've heard that Bitcoin is for everybody. Bitcoin is the honey badger. Bitcoin doesn't care for your enemies. So here's how I see that. Because it is the best money, it's the money protocol that God really recommends. Everybody that uses it is going to benefit. Now, if you get focused down and narrowed, like Bitcoin is the only thing and that's all I think about, it's still going to benefit you, but you do need to see it in context. I see it in the context of a world where Jesus is king, all of the benefits for health and for the way we think about life as not being merely physical, being more spiritual. There's a much wider context.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on the signal. Okay. Thanks so much for coming on, and hope you have a good rest of the week. And hopefully we can have you on the show again sometime.
Thanks for the invitation. This has been a blast, and I hope it's been helpful to some people.
Absolutely. All right. Take care.
You too. See you at the next meetup.
I hope that you enjoyed this episode of The Signal. In a world drowning in noise, signal is everything. Most people are overwhelmed, distracted, and deceived, not because they lack intelligence, but because they've lost the ability to discern what truly matters. But signal cuts through the noise. And Bitcoin is pure signal. It doesn't promise. It doesn't lie. It doesn't bend to opinion or propaganda. It just is. And as the world descends into even more chaos, distraction, and distortion, your ability to identify signal, to recognize what's real, true, and timeless, will be one of your greatest assets. So stay sharp, stay sovereign, stay tuned, because here on The Signal, we don't follow trends, we follow truth. I'm Dr. Satoshi, and in a world of noise, we are the signal.